We're going to get started. I can hear already that I'm going to have the competition from the loud voices next door. We had that yesterday afternoon as well. So we'll try to encourage everybody to speak into the mic, so hopefully you don't get distracted by the crosstalk. I'm Rudi Schubert. I'm with the IEEE Standards Association. This is the third in a set of panels that we had during this week, during the conference, and I appreciate the opportunity from some of the IEEE Consumer Electronics Society leadership asking us to talk about some of the things that are going on within standards that we would hope would be of interest to participants here. So this session we're going to be talking about some of the emerging technology initiatives that are going on within the Standards Association. Particularly we're going to be touching on mixed reality, artificial intelligence, and technology ethics. A lot of it, some people view these topics as somewhat futuristic, but they are here today, and there's a lot of activity going on within and other areas of the IEEE. So we have, aside from myself, we have three additional speakers here this morning. We have Monique Morrow, we have Jay Iorio, and B.C. Bierman. But I am going to kick things off on this discussion. So one of the areas that I work on within IEEE or within the Standards Association is really looking at what are the next generation standards that we envision needing at the IEEE. And certainly one of the areas we've done a lot with is virtual and augmented reality, and several initiatives that have gone on there. A little feedback. So, just a couple of slides to set the stage and provide a bigger perspective. Many people know about the work that goes on within IEEE standards that touches on, the formal standards development. I always like to say that the one that is usually most familiar to people is the IEEE 802 for Wi-Fi wireless standards. That tends to be well known. And if you're looking at that slide, the blue area that really represents the core standards development work that IEEE supports through all its volunteer participants on different working groups. But there's certainly a larger view of the standards life cycle. If you think about that green part, I actually work in the green and orange parts, I would say. So the green part is pre-standards. They don't just materialize overnight. A lot of times new technologies need some incubation period before people can really conceive of what the standards needs actually are, what are the priorities, and what are the best choices for things to work on. And then at the back end, once the standard is published, we don't like to just throw it over the wall and hope for the best. We've been providing increased services around what we call standards implementation. So in some areas that's doing workshops to explain standards, application-based workshops, as well as conformity assessment. Another one, people say, oh, do you meet this particular standard? We have programs in place that allow programs to get put together, so somebody could say it's conformant to a standard, certified to a standard. So we do a lot in those areas as well. So I tend to spend most of my time in that pre and post part of the work. It's perhaps a little bit less visible within IEEE than the core standards work, but certainly an important part of the larger picture of making standards valuable as we produce them. So in the emerging technologies area, we do a number of different things. Sometimes we work with within technical activities. If anyone's here with the first day of the conference, there was a nice presentation by the Future Directions Committee. That's a sort of a cross-society type of effort, I guess I would put it, that are looking at big themes around new technology areas. And within all of those, there's always a standards component. And so a number of initiatives that we do within the IEEE Standards Association is looking at what are the standards aspects in those different areas. And I just put a short list together, so certainly we look at the big themes like Internet of Things or big data. Increasingly, artificial intelligence is part of the discussion, and we'll get into that a bit more today. But other areas, smart materials, e-health, quite a few things that are still in, I'll say, the early stages. We can see them becoming more mainstream, but standardization isn't quite complete there. And of course, augmented virtual reality. We started doing some work in that, I'd say about 4 or 5 years ago, where it was really just pie in the sky type of an idea. And now if you were at any of the CES, you can see new applications and products are just everywhere. And so as that happens, there's an increasing need for standards to be put into place to help interoperability, to help interchangeability, really to promote and accelerate the ecosystem. So specifically, I manage a program within IEEE called the Industry Connections Program. And we say it's a pre-standards incubation, but it can be a lot more. If you think about a standards working group, is usually a collection of people who are volunteers who participate in writing a standard, and it's got a very formal process associated with it. It's intended to be very neutral, contributor-driven. What we actually created was sort of a parallel to that working group system, a little bit more informal, but the Industry Connections Program brings groups together that have a particular topic of interest. They want to socialize. Sometimes they're looking at, again, what's the roadmap of standards needs in the future. Sometimes they could be looking at maybe not even getting into standards. It might be premature, so some groups will write white papers looking at the technology issues that may be of value to actually raise awareness within the IEEE community and industry at large. So again, it's a very third-party. It's a neutral, safe harbor environment, if you want to call it that. It's not intended for people to be giving away their intellectual property, but it's a discussion group, amongst, sometimes we say amongst friendly competitors to better understand how they can accelerate technology in their area of interest. So, a couple of the areas, and I'm not going to delve into this slide too much because Jay is going to talk quite a bit. And I will admit, I actually stole this slide from Jay from a presentation he and I did a couple of months ago. So we have a number of initiatives around virtual reality. Jay's been doing quite a bit of work with the University of Southern California. There was a hackathon earlier this year, looking at a number of different areas. USC has a very robust program around virtual reality, and so we've been looking at that collaboration. I won't say more, I'll leave that to Jay. We've also been very active, trying to engage with the larger ecosystem that are out there. We usually have a presence at South by Southwest, looking at emerging tech and VR type areas. We're very active at Augmented World Expo, which is arguably the leading conference that's going on, and certainly on augmented reality, and they've kind of drawn virtual reality in as well in the last couple of years. And we also have presented a series of different webinars and social media engagements, really again trying to help position IEEE and the Standards Association as the future home for standards development in these areas. Similarly, with augmented reality, it was about 2014 that we actually first started getting more engaged in the AR community. And that actually led to a few of these industry connections programs being developed. Initially, we looked at one that was, looking at a high level at standards directions for the future. That somewhat morphed into what we were calling a smart glasses interest group, where some of the manufacturers and users of smart glasses would get together and just have some discussion about various technology issues, but also again standardization issues, where the priorities might be, and what were the trouble spots that were preventing AR from completely taking off the way we would all like to see it do that. And then about in the past year, we had a very specific use case for augmented reality where we had several players from the oil, gas, and electric utility industry come together because they have some specialized needs, they have some specialized use cases. They're maybe more unique. If you think about the consumer case, where people are doing the Pokemon augmented reality, or they're just using virtual reality for gaming. That's one set. But when you get into heavy industry like oil and gas and electric, they're looking at, they need very robust solutions. These things have to operate and not fail on an oil rig. They have to have long battery life. It's a different set of considerations as you get from a heavy industry versus consumer space. And there is, we did the first standard from IEEE on augmented reality. It's in process right now, but it's around learning experiences. And I will also say that many of you know Yu Yuan from Consumer Electronics Society. He's actually just gotten 5 new augmented reality standards launched. They were just approved by IEEE this past December, and he's starting work on that right now. In fact, the session he and I did together yesterday, he was recruiting people. So if you're looking to work on AR standards, feel free to talk to me or you, Yuan. We're happy to get you linked into that. I think I've mentioned this a little bit already. We talked about some of the presence that we've been developing within the AR community at IEEE. But where I really wanted to get into a little bit more is why we actually see standards as a driving factor. So if you think about wireless communications, and that's a highlighted bullet there, without the standards that have been developed around IEEE 802 for the wireless communications, I mean, it's covering Wi-Fi, it's covering Bluetooth, it's, body area networks, just about every flavor of wireless has really been done through 802. And that's really created, today you don't even think about the connectivity that you have in a wireless way, and that's largely driven by the IEEE standards. A really great standard, you don't even realize it's there. It's just really just in the background. It's making things work. You shouldn't really have to think too hard about it. And that having those standards in place really is what drives interoperability of products. It makes things plug and play. It makes things operate from different networks, different devices, having the ability for them to coexist. So we've tried to drive our work around AR, VR with that in mind, that all of this should be seamless in the future. So to get a little bit more specific, what I want to do is talk about some of the work that we did on augmented reality and smart glasses in the past year or so. And that industry connections group on smart glasses had done some road mapping activities. The goals when we started out, and this is actually a very similar approach that we take across other technologies, was first looking at technology gaps and what are the barriers to widespread adoption. If you walk the floor at CES, you see a lot of interesting ideas that are out there, and there's always that question of what would actually make this a product that you want in everybody's house, or in every industry that people are buying these things, and is there something that can be done from a standards perspective to accelerate that? So there's the standards needs, but there's also the priorities, and part of what I'll get into in a minute was we went out as a part of these workshops that we did to say, if you were, what are the things that you're concerned about? I mean, sometimes it could be things with the material, sometimes it could be things with the power aspects. Very often it's not just the feature-rich aspects of it, but it's very kind of nitty-gritty basics that are some of the issues that people get most concerned about. So not only are there those technology issues, but then there's the use cases. What's the killer app that's going to get AR, VR that's going to be out there, and looking at different industries, different applications that people are using to really try to hone in on where you're going to get the most bang for your buck on standardization activities. And then as an outcome of these, we really like to have it become actionable. It's nice to talk about it, but it's great if you can have a series of action items to follow it to make things take place. So when we did the smart glasses work, one of the first things we did is we broke it into 4 different categories or market segments. Because we were finding very different responses, very different approaches depending on which particular market you looked at. I mentioned industrial applications. They would actually look at things like, not only the robustness, safety issues are always paramount in an industrial environment, or how things would interoperate with back office systems. Somebody doesn't want to buy all these devices and only find that they can't integrate it into their legacy systems that are out there. Consumers have a different approach. They're really, they are interested in some of the feature aspects of it, certainly. But their bigger concern very often is cost. Like how much is, they don't want to buy necessarily a $1,000 headset if they can get the same experience out of a $100 headset. So, while industry cares about cost, the industry very often looks at the bigger picture, operational cost, and not only the cost of the device, but the cost of having that as a part of their work. The consumer is very often just looking more at that upfront cost of the headset itself. And then we had some unique applications. We were actually very lucky in the group that we had a gentleman from the U.S. Navy who was he was looking at applying these different technologies from a military viewpoint very specific to the Navy, but they had, again, different priorities. I think that they were looking at aspects such as very long battery life. You know, somebody in a military or first responder situation, they're sent out into a mission, they don't know how long they might be out there. You can't have the battery, if it's a critical device, you can't have the battery die 6 hours later and need to recharge. There's no place to recharge. So that, you know, I think battery and robustness were their two hot buttons. And then there's a myriad of other types of things. We were just kind of lumping them into professional services applications. A good example is the medical field. I mean, it's not heavy industry, it's not really military, but there's a lot of very interesting smart glasses applications that have been going on in the medical field where it can be used in a surgical situation, where a doctor is getting real-time information by looking at this a virtual set of instruments that's showing physiological attributes, and again, that's somewhat of a mission critical. They can't have that fail in the middle of an operation. I'm sure that I would hope that the doctor could manage without some of it, but preferably that won't happen. So there's a number of different applications that are out there in specific niche areas. All right, so this is one of the slides I thought was sort of interesting when we looked at the industrial, and I will say we got probably more feedback out of people on priorities when it came to the industrial applications. One of the things that came out very early was this resistance to change and cultural shifts. So we did quite a bit with the utility industry, and I remember we first went into that workshop, and we had quite a few people in there saying, "Well, what is this good for? Why do I really need it? We've gotten 99.99% reliability without it. How's it going to help me?" And then as you start talking about it a bit more, they start to see potential. I don't know what happened there. They start to see potential use cases. Bear with me 1 second. So, what are the applications that are really going to drive this? So, do we really need, this? How is it going to benefit my company? I mentioned the integration with legacy systems. That was certainly very large, and that was more in the ongoing operational costs of using smart glasses in a particular environment. But even more importantly, if somebody was looking to go out and buy, something like a daiquiri is one of the big providers of AR helmets. If they were going to buy that, how do you specify that? If you're a large, corporate entity, if you're a utility, you can't just say, "Hey, I saw this at CES and it was really cool, and I'm going to go out and buy it." You need to have very specific things in your procurement process. Does it meet this requirement? Does it meet that requirement? And you want it to be an industry standard requirement, not a very specific company requirement in most cases. The problem is there is nothing really codified out there today to say it needs to have X battery life. It needs to be able to resist this. It needs to operate in this temperature environment. Some very basic things that if you're a procurement organization, you're going to want to be able to point to something that is quasi-standardized or an agreeable set of what is really the key functionalities that you need. Because a procurement organization is not going to be able to say, "Well, we thought these were good and it sounded like the price was good." You have to be able to do a very analytical comparative analysis, and that's one of the key points, that short of standards being in place to do that, it makes it difficult because everybody could be buying different things. And then certainly worst case, going back to the integration, how are you assured that you're going to be able to get that? Augmented reality or smart glasses require information coming from somewhere. They're not built into the glasses. So what's your wireless connection going to be back, or what's your wireless connection environment? If you're working in a particular plant situation, are you going to have RF considerations, or to the talk that took place yesterday morning, ESD considerations? Are these going to operate as you need them in any type of environment? So it's very key in the industrial space that they were really pointing to these very basic things that they needed to have in place to make a large procurement decision. Safety overrode everything. And particularly from utility and heavy industry, safety is, again, so that has to be considered in depth. I think one of the things that we found was,
I think it's changed a lot over the last 2 years, but some of the earlier discussions with the smart glasses manufacturers, the pitch was always around, you know, the features and functions. It's like, oh, you know, this particular set of smart glasses, you can see, you know, even more things. Well, that feature-rich aspect was not really the driving point to a large industry. It might be something that a gamer would be into, and many of the people who were building smart glasses early on came from somewhat of a gaming community. But you know, I think they learned very quickly that it's different selling, you know, a consumer gaming device than it is into heavy industry. So that was you know, a very interesting finding that was coming out. So something that we did this past year within the Standards Association is we did a survey. I had worked with a few folks in the smart glasses group that we did, and you know, we said, well, you know, we've been doing these workshops, and they're sort of one-off workshops with different groups. Let's take more of a broad brush approach. And so, you know, as I close my part of the panel session here this morning, I was just going to put out some of the facts that actually came through the survey that we did. So, I think these were the three takeaways that we had. That overall, people seem to think that the adoption of smart glasses was going a lot slower than they expected. Now, I think that would be in part because many of the people who responded were from the smart glasses industry, and they had, you know, this rosy projection of everybody's going to want these things because I think they're really neat. So I think there was, you know, perhaps a little bit too much optimism early on, and so the consensus was that it was taking a bit longer than it would. The second one I've somewhat touched on, that the adoption hurdles tend to be more technology related, but the buying criteria tends very often to be around, you know, what I would call more non-technical features. Sometimes it's very aesthetic features. And you know, when we looked at the respondents, you know, we were saying, because we were trying to get an assessment of like, well, who's really responding to our survey. So we had sort of a mix. We didn't really have these middle of the road ones. I think, you know, we categorized it with like, you know, 0 to 100 employees, 100 to 1,000. They were all either less than 100 or more than 1,000, and I think that was somewhat representative of startups who were building the glasses and building some of the tools that were out there. And, you know, the larger companies were responding with what their expectations were if they were going to buy them. So we wanted to have that just to sort of level set and provide us an understanding of some of the results that we were seeing. We also were trying to get a good idea of, well, do people really understand what these glasses are? And I think by and large, you know, about 70-some-odd% of the folks responding had very good firsthand experience. They've been either trialing it, they had been, you know, or in many cases they were the ones who were building it. So, you know, so it was certainly a very knowledgeable audience who was responding, and that was key. We didn't want to get a lot of responses from somebody who said, "Oh, I used something for Pokemon, and that was it." You know, we wanted to have a knowledgeable respondent base. So, you know, again, the attitude towards adoption. You know, this was just looking at, you know, whether it was you know, things were going fast, things were going slow. You can see that only 7% of people were thinking it was going faster than expected. You know, so the lion's share was, you know, kind of accepting of the pace of change, or, you know, finding it a bit slower than they're liking. So this one's it's actually easier for you to read than for me to actually read it on my screen up here. But I thought this was, you know, perhaps, you know, the one bar chart that had the most interesting information. If you look at the adoption, or, you know, what were the hurdles to adoption, the number one choice was battery life. You know, again, people are not looking at, you know, all the cool features that it has. A very basic thing of, you know, I don't want to have to be charging this all the time. So battery life was really up there. And again, pricing. You know, that was, again, a driving factor. I think some of the consumer-oriented folks were, you know, certainly dominating that. But, you know, it's certainly I think, and we perhaps didn't word the question as well as we could, but I think this is, when we say high pricing, I think it's cost in general. Just sort of a question of, you know, what's the cost-benefit analysis of doing that. And then again, you get into the third one, you know, again, not features and all these things, it's comfort. You know, if somebody's going to wear these, particularly if they're working in a manufacturing environment and they're wearing the smart glasses and going to be wearing them for 8 hours, you know, straight, you know, how comfortable are they? You can't have them really heavy, weighing, you know, and that in itself would actually hinder production just by, you know, the aesthetics and the physical considerations around it. So, you know, it was you know, somewhat interesting that those were like the 3 or 4 items that were popping right up. You know, you get into that middle section, and that gets into a little bit more of the, you know, how well things are going to integrate, how robust. One of the things we were sort of fascinated by was how few people were worried about privacy. Privacy was all the way down at the bottom of the list in terms of, you know, hurdles. They said, you know, they weren't too worried about that as an adoption factor on it. Security was a little bit higher, but you know, we just thought that those were going to be, you know, much higher on the list based on discussion with people, you know, particularly in the industrial environment. So, you know, another cut at this was, you know, those were what people were perceiving as the hurdles. I think when we looked at, you know, what are the buying criteria, what would actually be the driving factors around it? Cost, again, was all the way at the top. That was one of the top rated areas. This was sort of on a scale, you know, rated, I think it was like a 1 to 7 scale or something like that. You know, so again, cost, size and weight, wear or comfort. You see those, you know, not only from, you know, what compels somebody to buy it, you know, but it somewhat goes hand in hand with what we saw in terms of the adoption hurdles, where people were looking at what needed to be modified over time. You go down all the way to the bottom, you know, display resolution. A lot of the manufacturers really say, it's like, again, you know, mine is better than my competitors because my display resolution is so much better. That's not something that was necessarily driving people as a buying criteria. It was, you know, so low on the list. You know, camera capabilities. You look at down towards the bottom, what we were seeing smart glasses manufacturers pitch as the advantage of buying their product were not necessarily the ones that were actually the things that were resonating with people about whether they were going to buy it. And then there was a couple other slides, and this got into a lot of details about some of the different features that people thought were important. They were looking at second screen capabilities. If you think of the old classic Google Glass, and or where you've got the little screen in the top corner of your eyeglasses, that people wanted to see that kind of thing. We looked at a lot of different areas here, and this was really to the advantage of some of the people who were on the group who were actually trying to get a better understanding of which some of those features were. But again, that was overall, all these different features were not necessarily the big driving factors. And I think that was what came out as somewhat interesting. And then again, we were looking at there's a variety of different types of smart eyewear out there. Which ones were the ones that people were most enthusiastic about, and the smart rear mirror type glasses are really the ones that were clearly ahead of the pack in terms of what were the ones of greatest interest to the respondents. So it was a very interesting thing, and what we've tried to do is we've been working slowly, I would say, on this white paper that's trying to capture a lot of this information. It's challenging because the market is moving so quickly that the information it becomes dated very quickly, so we almost need to keep on top of where the perspectives are. So that's just somewhat of a snapshot of a type of program that we do around emerging technologies within the Standards Association. So I'm just going to close by saying we welcome any new ideas people have when it comes to what we can do to actually support AR, VR, emerging tech issues in general. Our Industry Connections program has been growing very steadily. We're seeing a lot of new new products or new technology ideas that are coming in. And actually, probably because we have a couple of committee members who are actually from the Consumer Electronics Society, we're seeing a few more late in the past year or so, from folks who attend this conference. So we're very encouraged by that. And certainly, it doesn't always have to be in the early development. We always welcome new standards ideas as well. If they're ready to go, we are ready to support any standards development work as it is. So with that, I'm going to conclude, and we'll take questions at the end. I think we're going to try to be a little bit more interactive. I'm actually the only one who actually has a set of PowerPoint slides, because what we're going to try to do is just try to make this a very interesting, interactive dialogue. And while the speakers will be talking to each other, we certainly welcome any questions along the way as well.
Panasonic.